Listen closely. Can you hear it? That soft humming in your chest when you see her across the room. That ancient lullaby your bones remember, but your mind has forgotten. Jung called it the Anima, but he was being polite. What lives inside you is far older than Latin names, far hungrier than academic concepts. Picture this. A man sits in a therapist's office in Vienna, 1927. His hands shake as he describes his wife. How she reminds him of fresh bread, of Sunday mornings, of his mother's voice calling him home for dinner. The therapist takes notes. 3 years later, the man is found in his study, surrounded by love letters he never sent, addressed to a woman who looks nothing like his wife, but exactly like the Madonna painting that hung above his childhood bed. He'd been feeding something that was never satisfied, something that wore familiar faces to hide its endless appetite. You see, every man carries within him a phantom woman, assembled from his mother's anxieties, his sister's cruelties, his grandmother's unfulfilled dreams. She lives in the space between his ribs, whispering promises in a voice that sounds like home. And here's the terrible secret. She doesn't want him to love a real woman. She wants him to love her, the impossible her, the perfect her, the her that exists only in the humid greenhouse of his unconscious. The Greeks knew this. They called her Circe, turning men into swine not through magic, but through recognition, showing them what they already were. Medieval monks wrote about succubi with their mother's eyes, draining them not of seed, but of the will to wake. Even now, in 2024, researchers at Stanford found that 73% of men describe their ideal partner using adjectives they first heard applied to their primary caregiver. The Ouroboros of desire, eating its own tail in the dark. But here's where it gets delicious, where the knife twists. The women these men choose, oh, they know. Perhaps not consciously, but their bodies know. Their dreams know. They sense the ghost they're competing with, the invisible mother-lover-destroyer that no amount of devotion can exorcise. So they begin to feed it too, becoming what he secretly wants. Not a partner, but a permission slip to remain infantile, to never truly leave the womb. I once knew a man who collected his girlfriend's hair from her brush, keeping it in a small box like relics of a saint. When asked why, he couldn't explain, only that it smelled like safety, like the blanket he carried until he was 12. She left him, of course, but not before she'd started wearing his mother's perfume. Unconsciously, she claimed, though we both knew better. The Anima had infected them both, turning their love into a recursive loop of need and disgust. You feel it, don't you? That squirming discomfort when she mothers you, followed immediately by the ache when she doesn't. The way you simultaneously want her to save you and despise her for trying. This is the Anima's trick. She makes you hunger for your own imprisonment. Turns every woman into a funhouse mirror reflecting your original wound. The Jungians will tell you to integrate her, to make peace with your inner feminine. But they don't tell you what she demands in return. The sacrifice of every fantasy, every projection, every comfortable lie you've told yourself about what love means. She wants you to see women as they are. Not mothers, not saviors, not destroyers, but complex beings with their own shadows to feed. There's a tale from the Carpathian Mountains about a young man who fell in love with a girl who looked exactly like his dead mother. On their wedding night, she revealed her true face, ancient, terrible, honest. "You've been making love to a ghost," she said. "Now choose, the ghost or me." He chose the ghost, of course. Most men do. It's easier to love what's already dead than risk being devoured by something truly alive. Here's my question for you, whispered like a curse in a cathedral. When you close your eyes and imagine being held, whose arms do you really see? Your lover's? Or the first woman who taught you that love and consumption were the same thing? The Anima doesn't want you to answer. She wants you to keep feeding her your life force, one relationship at a time, until you're nothing but a husk filled with other people's expectations. But perhaps, and this is the faint hope Jung glimpsed in his darkest patience, perhaps recognizing her hunger is the first step towards starving her out. Or perhaps she's already won, and these words are just her speaking through me, wearing yet another mask, offering yet another mother's embrace disguised as wisdom. The most dangerous women aren't found in deep oceans. They wait in puddles, knowing desperate men will imagine depth. There's a Japanese proverb that translates roughly to, "The fox spirit appears most beautiful to the loneliest traveler." Sit with that for a moment. Let it curdle in your mouth like spoiled milk mixed with honey. I'm going to tell you about shallow water, about the kind of drowning that happens in bathtubs and puddles, where you could stand up any time if only you remembered you had legs, but you won't remember. That's the entire point of the performance. Last Tuesday, or was it 1,000 Tuesdays ago, a hedge fund manager in Manhattan paid $500 for a session with a dominatrix who looked remarkably ordinary. Brown hair, nervous laugh, chipped nail polish. She didn't hurt him. She simply sat in a chair and ignored him for an hour while scrolling through her phone. He wept the entire time, and when asked why he returned weekly, he said, "She reminds me of every woman who never chose me." The shallow water of indifference, where men pay to drown in precisely 3 feet of neglect. You see, the siren's paradox isn't that men are lured by beauty or song. It's that they're magnetized by absence, by the void shaped like attention. Modern dating apps have quantified this. Profiles showing disinterest receive 340% more super likes than those expressing enthusiasm. We've gamified our own destruction, turned romantic negligence into a cryptocurrency of desire. But let me paint you a prettier horror. Imagine a woman who texts back just slowly enough to keep you checking your phone, who cancels plans just often enough to make her presence feel like a gift, who kisses you like she's thinking of someone else, because she's thinking of herself, because she learned long ago that men mistake distance for depth. The ancient Slavs had a name for this, the rusalka, the drowned maiden who lures men into rivers not with beauty, but with the appearance of needing rescue. Here's the sick joke. She doesn't need saving. She's already dead. But men will drown themselves trying to revive what was never alive, projecting oceans onto puddles, reading War and Peace in a grocery list. Jung wrote about this in his private journals, the ones they didn't publish until 2009. Man's greatest tragedy isn't that he loves what destroys him, but that he destroys what might save him while chasing reflections in still water. Consider the executive who left his wife of 20 years for his secretary, not because she was younger or prettier, but because she mispronounced his name. That small failure, that tiny withholding of complete recognition, became an ocean he needed to cross. His ex-wife knew him too well, you see. There was no water left to drown in, no mystery to project his emptiness onto. The secretary lasted 6 months before she too learned his name correctly. Now he's learning Mandarin, chasing a new assistant who speaks no English. The puddles get shallower, but his thirst grows deeper. Here's what the self-help books won't tell you. Some men need the siren. They've built their entire identity around the swim, the struggle, the beautiful futility of trying to possess what doesn't want them. Take away the chase, and they're left with the horrifying prospect of stillness, of a love that doesn't require performance or proof. or the constant threat of abandonment. I knew a philosopher once, brilliant man, wrote papers on Schopenhauer's concept of will, who only dated women in the process of leaving the country. 3 months, he'd say, is the perfect amount of time to fall in love without having to survive it. He drowned in airport terminals and goodbye kisses, each departure a small death he could control. The shallow water knows your name. It knows you prefer the idea of drowning to the reality of swimming. It knows you'd rather suffocate in 6 inches of maybe than stand up and walk away. And here's the truly grotesque part. The women who play siren often hate the role. They're exhausted by your projections, your need for them to be simultaneously available and impossible. But they've learned that being depths you'll never reach is safer than being a person you might actually see. There's a modern study from Cambridge, 2024, still warm from the printer, showing that relationships with the highest passion scores also have the highest exhaustion rates. The men in these relationships reported feeling perpetually underwater, while their partners felt responsible for someone else's breathing. Both were drowning, just at different speeds. So here's my question, delivered like a stone thrown into still water. What would happen if you stopped swimming? If you stood up in that shallow water and realized the siren was just a tired woman checking her phone, waiting for you to notice she's not actually singing? Would you feel saved? Or would you immediately start looking for deeper puddles, convinced that this time, surely this time, you'll find an ocean worthy of your magnificent drowning? Every man marries his mother's shadow. The only question is whether he notices before the music stops. Begin with a whisper, the kind that makes you lean in despite yourself. She's wearing your mother's disappointment like perfume, and you're getting drunk on the familiar sting. Prague, 1894. Franz Kafka writes in his diary, "I am constantly seeking in women the punishment I feel I deserve for existing." He never published that line. His executor found it written in the margin of a love letter, the ink smudged by what might have been tears or spit or something else entirely. The woman he wrote to, she married someone else, someone who didn't need her to be his executioner. But you understand, Kafka, don't you? That exquisite torture of finding partners who excel at the specific cruelty you learn to call love. The uncanny precision with which you select women who know exactly which wounds to salt, which scars to reopen. It's not masochism, it's archaeology. Digging up the same bones over and over, hoping this time they'll form a different skeleton. Let me tell you about the mother wound masquerade. This grand ball where everyone comes dressed as someone else's trauma. The men arrive wearing their father's absence like a tuxedo. The women draped in their mother's bitterness like vintage Devour. And they dance. Oh, how they dance. To music only they can hear. The lullabies that were never sung. The apologies that were never offered. Here's what happened to you. Yes, you, leaning into your screen like it might finally explain everything. Somewhere between your first breath and your first heartbreak, you learned that love comes with conditions. Maybe it was the way she sighed when you cried. Maybe it was how her affection flickered on and off like a broken bulb, teaching you to perform for light. Maybe it was subtler. The way she loved your achievements more than your existence, turning you into a resume with a pulse. Now you're 35, or 55, or 25, and you're still auditioning for a role in your own life. Enter the woman who reminds you of home. Not the warm home, not the safe home, but the home that taught you to sleep with one eye open. She criticizes you just right. Not enough to leave, too much to relax. She withdraws affection like your mother withdrew approval. And suddenly you're 7 years old again, trying to be good enough for someone who's too wounded to notice. The research is nauseating in its clarity. A 2023 University of Vienna study found that men consistently rated women as more attractive when those women exhibited dismissive attachment styles similar to their primary caregivers. We're literally aroused by our own abandonment. The body keeps the score, and it's playing a rigged game. But here's where it becomes baroque, where the horror becomes almost beautiful. She's doing it too. That woman you've cast as your mother's understudy? She's looking for her father in your indifference, her mother in your judgment. You're both ghosts, haunting each other's childhood bedrooms, mistaking recognition for love, familiarity for fate. I once watched a couple fight in a restaurant in Berlin. She threw wine at him, expensive wine, the kind you're supposed to let breathe. He smiled as it dripped down his face, and I knew immediately. His mother was volatile, and her chaos felt like coming home. She saw his smile and started crying, not from guilt, but from rage that he wouldn't fight back, wouldn't play the other role in her practiced tragedy. They left together, of course. They always do. The masquerade must go on. Kierkegaard wrote, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have." But he was wrong. The most painful state is recreating the past, particularly the one that already broke you, expecting different results from the same wound. You want to know the sickest part? Lean in closer. Let me contaminate you properly. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you find someone whose mother wound fits yours like a key in a lock. And you spend 40 years in a functioning dysfunction, raising children who'll repeat the same dance with different partners. You'll call it love because it's familiar, because pain you recognize feels safer than joy you don't. The Greeks had a word, amathia, which means not just ignorance, but the active refusal to learn. Every man practicing amathia with his mother's ghost, every woman enabling it, while dancing with her father's shadow. The masquerade where everyone knows they're wearing masks, but pretends they're seeing true faces. So here's my question. Posed like a prayer to a God who finds our suffering amusing. If you could see her without your mother's overlay, without the film of old wounds coloring everything rose red and familiar, would you even recognize her? Or would she become a stranger? Someone you'd pass on the street without that sick pull in your stomach that you've learned to call attraction. Better question, would you want to? Trading life force for the illusion of being needed. Some men pay in blood for the privilege of feeling essential, never noticing they're being drained by something that was never truly alive. A sigh, heavy as wet wool. Have you noticed how tired you've become since she started needing you so perfectly? There's a man in Toronto who hasn't slept properly in 3 years, not because of insomnia, but because his girlfriend has nightmares, always between 3 and 4 a.m., always requiring exactly 45 minutes of comfort. She can't remember them in the morning, these phantoms that demand his consciousness as tribute. His friends say he looks gray, translucent, like newspaper left in rain. He says he's never felt more useful. This is the vampire's bargain, and it has nothing to do with necks or teeth or Gothic castles. It's about the slow siphoning that happens when someone discovers you'd rather be consumed than alone. The modern vampire doesn't take blood. She takes time, energy, potential futures. And you offer them willingly, grateful for the purpose, for the beautiful burden of being someone's only source of light. Jung called this the savior complex. But he was being clinical. What we're discussing is more ancient, more cellular. The male need to be Atlas, holding up someone else's sky until his spine snaps and he can finally rest. Exhaustion as accomplishment, depletion as devotion. Let me paint you a portrait in shades of gray. She has anxiety, or depression, or trauma, or all three. The unholy trinity of modern romance. You're her medication, her therapy, her emotional support animal with opposable thumbs and a credit card. Every crisis requires your immediate attention. Every wobble in her mood becomes your emergency. You've stopped seeing friends because she needs you. You've stopped pursuing dreams because she can't handle change right now. You're dying by millimeters, and she's thriving on your decomposition. But here's the twist that would make Bram Stoker weep. She didn't start this way. The vampirism was collaborative, a duet you both choreographed. You needed to be needed more than you needed to be whole. She learned to perform need because it was the only currency you accepted. Now you're both trapped in this economy of extraction, where she must always be breaking for you to feel valuable, where you must always be fixing for her to feel loved. The folklore is consistent across cultures. Vampires can't enter unless invited. The West African Obaifo, the Philippine Aswang, the Chilean Puchin, they all require permission. And you, my exhausted friend, you don't just invite them in. You renovate your entire life to accommodate their hunger. A study from the Relationship Institute of Melbourne, published just this January, found something delicious. Men who score high on rescue orientation have 67% higher cortisol levels than those who don't. They're literally dying faster, stress hormones flooding their system like a slow-motion heart attack. But when asked about relationship satisfaction, they score higher than average. Addiction to their own destruction, mistaking the fever for warmth. I knew a sculptor once who stopped creating because his partner needed him to manage her career. She was a painter, you see, too fragile for the business side of art, so he became her manager, her accountant, her social media strategist, her emotional regulator. His hands, which once shaped clay into dreams, now only typed emails and held her while she cried about critics who didn't understand her genius. 5 years later, she left him for another artist, someone whose creativity hadn't been vampirized into service. "You became boring," she said. Of course he did. Corpses usually are. The vampire's bargain always includes this clause. The more you give, the less you're worth. Your utility becomes your identity, and utilities are replaceable. The moment you're too exhausted to perform your function, the vampire finds another donor, and you're left drained, confused, wondering how saving someone led to losing yourself. But wait, here's where it gets exquisite, where the horror becomes almost erotic. Some men prefer this. The vampire's bite is preferable to the mirror's reflection. As long as you're needed, you don't have to face who you are when no one's watching. As long as you're someone's salvation, you can postpone your own reckoning. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants." You want to stop being drained, but you don't want to want that. The exhaustion has become your identity, the depletion your definition. Without her needs, who are you? Just another middle-aged man with untested potential and dreams that expired while you were busy being someone else's life support. So here's my question, whispered like a lullaby to the walking dead. What would happen if you stopped offering your throat? If you said, "I'm tired," and meant it, and didn't immediately apologize for having limits? Would she wither without your blood? Or would she simply find another donor, proving what you've always suspected, that you were never special, just available? And worse, would you miss the bite? What happens when men stop feeding the feminine hunger? In the silence after you stop performing, you might hear something terrifying. Your own voice, saying what you actually want. It begins with a laugh, bitter as burnt coffee. The day you stop chasing what destroys you is the day you discover you've been running from what might save you. Picture this. A man, 63 years old, sitting in an empty house. His third wife just left. His daughters don't call. His mother, dead for 5 years, still visits him in dreams where she's disappointed by his breakfast choices. He's reading Jung by candlelight. The electricity was shut off. He forgot to pay bills while managing everyone else's emotions. He comes across this line: the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. He laughs. Then he weeps. Then he does something unprecedented. He stops. Stops chasing, stops performing, stops offering himself as kindling for other people's warmth. He sits in the dark for 3 days, neither dying nor living, just being. On the 4th day, something shifts. He realizes he doesn't know what he likes for breakfast. 40 years of eating what wives and mothers suggested, and he's never asked his own tongue what it wants. This is the liberation prophecy, though liberation is too clean a word for what actually happens. It's more like demolition, the controlled collapse of everything you built to avoid being alone with yourself. It's the terrible freedom that comes when you stop feeding the feminine hunger and realize you've been starving too. But let me tell you what Jung didn't put in his published works, what he scrawled in letters to colleagues who'd understand. When a man stops projecting his anima onto every woman he meets, when he stops seeking mother, lover, destroyer in female form, something monstrous happens. He has to face the feminine within himself. Not the pretty integration they teach in therapy, but the raw, chaotic, creative force he's been running from since he first learned that boys don't cry. The studies coming out of Stockholm's Institute for Relationship Dynamics are fascinating. Men who underwent what they called romantic detox, 6 months without dating, pursuing, or even fantasizing about partnership, showed dramatic changes. Not just the expected decrease in anxiety, but something else. 78% reported experiencing emotions they couldn't name, creative impulses they'd suppressed since childhood, and a disturbing comfort with uncertainty. One subject, a banker from London, started writing poetry, terrible poetry, about spreadsheets and dying plants, but poetry nonetheless. Another began cooking elaborate meals for himself, setting the table for one with candles and music, treating himself like the lover he'd always sought. A third discovered he didn't actually like sex that much. He liked being wanted, and once he stopped needing that validation, his entire sexuality reorganized itself around pleasure instead of performance. Here's what they don't tell you about stopping the chase. The women notice, not immediately, but eventually, they sense the shift in electromagnetic fields. The man who stops performing masculinity becomes mysteriously attractive, precisely because he's no longer available for projection. He's not a screen anymore. He's a person. And real people are terrifying and magnetic in equal measure. I watched this happen to a friend, brilliant programmer, divorced twice, always in some stage of romantic catastrophe. He decided to stop, just stop. Deleted the apps, stopped going to bars, stopped viewing every interaction through the lens of potential. 6 months later, he was unrecognizable. Not physically, though he'd lost the haunted look of the perpetually hunting, but energetically. He'd started a garden. He read fiction. He called his sister just to talk, not to complain about women. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, women started approaching him. Not the vampires, not the sirens, not the mother substitutes, but actual women. Complex, self-contained women who were curious about this man who seemed to need nothing from them. He dated one for a while, but here's the beautiful thing. When it ended, he was fine. Not devastated, not relieved, just fine. He'd learned the secret. You can only love what you don't need. Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." And the chaos isn't in the women you chase, it's in you. Dressed in drag as your own anima, waiting for you to stop running long enough to dance with it. So here's the prophecy. Delivered like medicine that tastes like poison but might cure you. When men stop feeding the feminine hunger outside themselves, they discover they've been the hungry feminine all along, the devouring mother, the impossible lover, the destroying goddess, all living in their own psyche, projected onto every woman who had the misfortune of resembling their unlived life. The liberation isn't in finding the right woman or swearing off women entirely. It's in the apocalyptic realization that you are both the prison and the key, the vampire and the blood, the siren and the drowning man. It's in stopping long enough to ask, what if I'm already whole? What if the hunger was never about them? And here's my final question, my parting curse, my reluctant blessing. Are you brave enough to stop? To sit in the ruins of your romantic mythology and build something new from the debris? To face the feminine not in another's face, but in your own mirror, terrible and beautiful and absolutely yours? Or will you close this video, return to the apps, and pretend you never heard the prophecy that could save you? The choice, like the hunger, was always yours.